So I'm not gonna get started.
Yeah, probably. Hi, everybody. All right, ready for another morning. You're feeling after my throat here. So I'm gonna let you introduce yourself, but here we go.
Great, thank you so much for the invitation to come by and present today, Sarah. So I've had the pleasure of meeting many of you, but hopefully get the opportunity to chat with you guys a little bit further. I'm Fiona Mack, I'm the regional head of JLabs, just located right next door. It's our partner with the TNC. Can tell you a little bit about myself. I came to Houston in 2020, to September 2020, from the New York, New Jersey area. So I'm still new to the city, new to this role in Johnson & Johnson. And where the JLabs really is the incubator arm of Johnson & Johnson Innovation. I have a background in early stage drug discovery, a PhD in molecular biology, but most of my career in large pharma, working in the oncology and rare disease space. So I started out as a bench scientist at Pfizer, really helping to develop programs up into IND enabling studies. But while I was there, I worked a lot in the external innovation space, so evaluating novel modalities, like antisense therapies, bispecifics, T-cell engagers, and really helping to define what are kind of those key go-no-go decisions for when you're working with a partner to move the program to the next stage. I moved on to work at Roche, where I also worked on programs for the external innovation team. We evaluated programs from early stage target ID up until phase 1 and phase 2, with the idea that we really wanted programs that complement our internal portfolio. And as I said, and then I spent some time at Ipsen, which unlike Pfizer and Roche, didn't really have a strong R&D organization. They really were focused on development, so really did the clinical and commercialization of programs in rare disease. So they were really open to building an entire portfolio from start to finish using external resources. So each one of those has a different flavor and a different sort of criteria for how they want to bring in onboard opportunities. And so feel free to ask me any questions kind of related to the different business development strategies and how you can partner with corporations. But before we kind of get into any details, I always think it's kind of fun to highlight why external innovation is so key to our industry. So let's just start with a little bit of quiz. What percentage of assets should come from the external sources to really create a balanced and competitive portfolio? Particularly important for companies that do have a very strong focus and with their internal R&D organization. So you guys can just shout out a number. We don't really have to take a poll, but what would you think the appropriate balance would be?
85.
85 from external. Okay, well, that's a little bit high, but as I said, when I worked at Ipsen, the number was as high as 85%, almost the entire portfolio came from external. This is just from Roche's particular example, that they really were suggesting that it should be about 35%, given that they do have a strong emphasis on internal R&D, but they want to make sure that they remain abreast of what's going on, with the realization that you can't do everything internally. So they really want to be able to drive their internal portfolio, but really balance that with what other factors are really changing from the external market. They think that they have the capacity really and the know-how to really evaluate these programs and really to move them forward if they do get internalized. But taking a step back, how many of the top 6 best-selling drugs in 2020 do you think were obtained either through licensing or acquisition? These are like billions of dollar drugs. So, any guesses?
All of them.
All of them? I think we're through licensing. Well, close. All but 2. So Eliquis and Eylea were developed in-house. Everything else came through an acquisition or a licensing deal. So you can see why we're constantly reaching out, knowing that really our best-selling drugs don't necessarily can be developed in-house with a lot of these broad organizations. Okay, and now moving to the immuno-oncology spaces, which of the following immunotherapy treatments were discovered and developed in-house by the current owners?
No. Only C.
You want to say C? C is the one that was developed in-house?
D.
B was the only one that was developed in-house. Okay.
I'm sorry, this is the point. E.
That's good. All right, actually, none of these are developed in-house. They all came from an acquisition. So even the Atezo was developed at Genentech, but which was later acquired by Roche. So once again, all of these blockbusters that are really kind of changing how we do therapeutics did not develop in-house, but they really are being, at least clinically and then commercially developed by larger partners. And finest, what are the highest cumulative sales generated by a single acquired drug in the first 15 years? Meaning, what is one of our mega blockbuster drugs that really came from an acquisition? Have an idea? Just the number? Well, actually, this is not, I think they're missing something here, but anyway, this was for Lipitor, is actually, it's still in the running. I think probably by 2024, the answer is going to be Humira, which, as we said, was also founded through an acquisition, but Lipitor is still the leading drug, best-selling drug of all time, which was acquired by Pfizer through an acquisition firm for Warner Lambert. So really, all of our big blockbusters at this moment have come through some level of acquisition or licensing.
Fiona, do you know?
If I can stop you. The Japanese scientists who developed this type of drugs never patented the drug.
Lipitor.
Yeah, never patented the drug. So the person who develops this type of drugs, it's a Japanese, he never make a patent because he considers that science has to be free for everybody. And other people are making hundreds of billions of dollars.
Still making hundreds of billions of dollars off of it. Sarah?
I was gonna say, do you know offhand how much that acquisition was?
Not offhand, no.
That's good,
It
that's
was
fine
a
for me to.
full-scale it wasn't just a Lipitor, it was the acquired Warner Lambert, so they brought in the whole company, which is, having worked at Pfizer, that was kind of their model for quite some time. I was actually part of the Wyeth acquisition, many years ago, and became one to Pfizer. So, as we're thinking about really how do we kind of maximize our market potential, we know that more products really have to be differentiated to really see its true value. And with that, we have to be faster, be more innovative in order not to just generate more me-too drugs. So we know that this level of innovation needs to increase for us to truly be successful and meet a lot of the market expectations. We, in industry, so I think these previous examples really highlight maybe what industry is good at. Having an infrastructure to develop and commercialize. We certainly have capital, we have expertise from manufacturing to clinical development that can really help that, but that is not necessarily what's the core of innovation, which you really need to be small, nimble teams, be cost saving, really be able to take early stage risk. So, but combined, we think that's where we can kind of move that needle to increase the speed of innovation and get us to really these next transformational drugs. Just want to highlight a few examples from JP Morgan. If many of you aren't aware, JP Morgan was started, almost 40 years ago as an initial way for investors to kind of be more involved with healthcare. Now it's really expanded to being like the premier healthcare industry meeting of the year, which they really will sort of highlight big partnering deals that have been ongoing for in 2020 and highlight different trends on what the expectations are from a biotech market perspective. A few that I wanted to highlight here were deals by large pharma, particularly in the spaces of oncology or perhaps technologies that can enable across broad therapeutics. So BMS is placing a lot of bets on Century Therapeutics, where they're entering into a strategic collaboration to develop IPCs that are allogeneic therapies. Trends I think you can see from JP Morgan wasn't so much just straight acquisitions. No mergers and acquisitions were really highlighted. This is, I think, true for the past couple of years, but they're really focused on these early stage research collaborations where there are in partnerships with early stage biotech that have novel technologies. And in many of these cases, the partner really is doing a lot of the early stage discovery and development, and then the large pharma group is really focused on clinical development and commercialization. As I said, the Moderna, who's flush with its COVID cash, is actually venturing also now into the oncology space, looking for, once again, with Charisma, looking at a different cell type outside of T cells that could be used for cell therapies within oncology. BioNTech also coming in money from their vaccine approaches with Pfizer, has invested in another immunotherapy approach with Crescendo to develop some immunotherapies. It's kind of using their human body platform to combine this with maybe mRNA targets, so using the technology of BioNTech and this antibody-based approach to really open up new spaces for immunotherapies. And then other large companies have really developed, they said, trying to push what the next level of gene editing was going to be that could be applied across multiple cell types. So Bayer is making some very large investments with Mammoth, which I think is still very open and what their therapeutic strategy is going to be, but it's really based upon, what's her name, Doudna is the founder of this, so it's really looking at the CRISPR technology and how that could be applied across multiple therapeutics. Pfizer is looking at same thing with the Beam, which is they're also looking at, I believe is another way to do RNA targeting. And the same thing, Amgen is partnered with Arrakis with this multi-target collaboration to really look at RNA degraders. So we do have some deals that are focused in oncology, particularly in cell therapies, but focused on allogeneic therapies. And then a lot of enabling technology focusing on gene editing and in next generations, ways that we can modulate not only cancer targets, but even some of these other non-tractable targets. So we'll see how some of these plays go out. If you kind of dig into it, some of these are nicely complementing portfolios. Some of them are building new portfolios for companies such as Moderna. But it really is trying to put them in position to maximize the value of their internal cell-based therapies or gene therapy approaches that they have. So I believe, Sarah probably highlighted a lot of the nitty-gritty details of going into collaborations with organizations, like what goes into a term sheet, what are some of the considerations. Like I'm not going to rehash a lot of that. There are some nice sites here called, with a link here that really goes through the anatomy of the biotech business deal. I just wanted to highlight maybe some key considerations. Like first of all, I think as you guys are considering, like if you want to partner, and then when do you partner? And if you've made the decision to go into partnering, there are lots of things to think about sort of as you having these conversations with the business development. And I think it just behooves before you even go into the term sheet to really define what kind of are your key go-no-goes. This could be on a financial level, or it could really be on kind of the scientific level. What are the outcomes and the IP that you want to remain on? Who wants to share in these aspects of development? Have a lot of that understanding before you go into discussions and start crafting your term sheets and your scope of work. A lot of these, as the previous example highlighted, these are still very much early stage research collaboration. So there is a lot of back and forth, and you need to define the scope of work based upon a scientific discussion. So for you, understanding what your go-no-go decisions are from one stage to the next is going to be quite imperative.
Could you comment on the, so, I assume that sometimes those collaborations might be more favorable for the small company than classic venture funding. Is that true, or is it just like, is it like, there might be less dilution, there might be more like a contract relationship, I don't know, like what's the flavor of some of these?
Well, I don't think they're necessarily, they can still go coincide, but there are going to be certain restrictions that the venture money puts on versus what a research collaboration, which would be very focused on almost sponsored research. Like we're giving you money to do these components of a scope of work, and then the outcome of that could be an option or a licensing deal. Well, the venture is really, they're taking equity in your company, they want to have, owner or at least authority of how you generate your C-suite, and then, have that appropriate exit strategy. But I'll let Sarah further comment.
I think it depends. Like Ray, I think it can be favorable if you have, say, a platform where you're generating lots of different products. It can help you fund that without doing it through venture. Sometimes these are not mutually exclusive. Sometimes pharma also takes equity and does an investment as well. I don't know. It kind of just depends on what the structure is. If you're a single asset company, it's likely something that could be a trigger for a later acquisition. The risk is, of course, if they decide not to do that, and may or may not even be dependent on the science, it could be, priorities have shifted or something. They'll still look bad for your next venture round. So you kind of want to think about that as well. So I don't know if it's.
I don't view them as distinct, that you can't get venture money and move on. So when we also look to, do we want to do collaborations with companies, there is an assessment of their funding, how much runway do they have, right? And so do they have venture money? Are they backed by incredible teams? But in terms of a true research collaboration, that can be distinct, you know, as I said, because for these types of collaborations, the endpoint is going to be an option or a license. They're not necessarily going to want to take equity in your company. However, that could be both. And I'll walk you through some of how Johnson & Johnson approaches these types of collaborations, because in principle, they would like to be able to do what they call these multi-component deals, where we do an equity investment in the company, we also do a research collaboration in the company, we incubate them in our own JLab space, but there are considerations for each one of those, if we do them all three, or if we do one component of the other. But from an individual company's perspective, I think it kind of depends on, at least certainly taking venture money, as I said, that comes with certain stipulations that you are expected to build out a fully fledged company within X amount of time.
Yeah.
While a research collaboration, this would be money that is really tied to a particular scope of work and a milestone where there's no equity, you can continue to get other SBR funding, other grant funding, while you really build out utilizing this as a mechanism for doing a lot of this proof of concept data or even develop a therapeutic before you really have to take on venture money. So I think that there are advantages if you can to doing this, but it's not it won't hinder continuing to raise more money.
Yeah, and just as a quick note, you know, we didn't spend a ton, we spent most of the time talking about like terms and investments and stuff from the perspective of venture. We actually haven't spent that much time talking about it in the terms of these collaborations, but I wouldn't get us hung up on the mechanisms per se right now, because that's what these articles are for, is thinking about it from a strategic standpoint, like what do you even need to.
Yeah, so that's what I just wanted to highlight as you are considering partnerships. What are things to think about even before going in? As I said, you want to, if you decide to go into a partnership, it's very much dependent upon like who should I partner with. And as you are beginning to have these conversations, the first stop is always to have that kind of scientific discussion with the subject matter experts within the company and help you define kind of what those go-no-goes. As you go into really the aspects of a term sheet, like this is indeed the partner that you want to work with based upon their expertise, based upon their resources. I'll also say some things like these softer skills, how well you work together is another aspect that can't really get captured here. But part of the term sheets, in addition to the funding mechanisms, the options, et cetera, there is an aspect of governance that I don't think people pay enough attention to. And this has a lot of implications on even how you craft some of the terms. So understanding clearly like who decides, you know, what the program is and how it develops is key and can have implications on the overall valuation of your program. So what this means is, as I said, for an early stage program, you're going to be expected to hit certain milestones, and I don't want to get into kind of too much terminology and what's considered like a candidate for further development, but there will be kind of stage gates in which they're assessing, does your molecule, be it antibodies, small molecule, meet certain criteria to progress to the next stage. And you want to, in these criteria, although in some pharma companies are quite distinct, there's always a little bit of interpretation to them. So understanding like who is going to be able to make the ultimate decision if you've met a milestone or not is kind of key to how the program could develop for the next phase. You don't want to be in a position where you find your program has really met all the established criteria, but like the other partner does not feel that way, and then there's like kind of this standstill. So it goes beyond simply defining who's on the joint steering committee, but who has leadership within that to really progress the program to the next stage. And finally, I think just some examples for after you've done your term sheet, you've negotiated well, hopefully found favorable terms for both yourself and the pharma company, that you now need to start a successful collaboration. From my experience, one aspect of this I think is often overlooked is really the alliance management component of that post-deal organization. You may schedule for these joint steering committees to meet every 3 to 4 months, but as many as you're aware, this could be very involving science for your early stage projects. So having a good alliance manager that keeps you in contact with the large pharma group and keeps you in contact with the scientists really goes a long way into kind of establishing trust, getting buy-in for each one of the decisions that you've made, and making sure that there really is like this open communication and language that really creates a successful collaboration. I think most pharmas, when they go into these, really do view this as not so much where you're taking your program and we're just going to do it on our own. You throw it over the fence and you see what comes out. After 6 months, it's kind of the same way. They also don't feel that they're just going to give money to you, come back 6 months a year and see what's happened. You need to kind of remain in dialogue and hopefully have some shared resources, so there is shared risk and shared reward to make it successful. And making sure that you remain in communication through alliance management is absolute key. So I put in a link here to, as Sarah said, this whole anatomy for this business deal that even goes through templates and what some of these term sheets could look like. Is a very useful resource to help you guide through any additional details. But okay. So okay then. So I've been on the due diligence side for quite some time. Every company has a variety of criteria that they're looking at for really assessing the details as you go into due diligence and look within your data for small molecules versus large molecules, and you can get into that very specific at a later point, but quite broadly, this is what they're thinking about as programs come to us, as we begin to evaluate them. Would this be transformational? Sometimes an incremental change is still a good reason to partner, but I think as I highlighted some of the examples for JP Morgan, like those types of investments where we are looking at gene editing technology, looking at RNA targeting, if they work, would be truly transformational for the field. So those always get kind of a high priority if we think it's going to really be a game changer for us and can't be something that is missing if the field is moving in that direction. Is the science partner credible? So that could be from an academic perspective, but also as you're hearing, credibility can come from also being venture backed. Certainly with a lot of the prestigious venture groups, if they have made some investments, that always gives some credence that other people are placing bets on this company. This could be something that really warrants us to have a deeper dive into it. The third is I really kind of harken back on like how do we really make this a successful collaborations? Do we have internal capabilities that can really support this program? No one really wants to set for failure. So we really plan for success, and do we understand what is needed to bring these programs to the next step? If not, can we build those internal capabilities even from a development standpoint that would be necessary? This can extend from an internal R&D, making sure that we have enough like expertise in doing synthetic biology to move a program forward, to all the way to like a sales force. While we may have a variety of people selling oncology, but if we don't really have touch points and liver metastasis, really be able to maximize the utility of this drug. And so, do we have that? Or are we willing to build that in order to maximize the success of this? Next one is really the deal terms fair. This is also something that is debatable. You can really see a lot of valuations for companies are based upon comparables, like what somebody else has paid for it, and then you'll get a number. Is that truly fair given what the valuation is going to be? And you see a lot of deals would kind of fall apart at this stage because it's not considered really fair. Well, even though other companies have made these kind of significant investments, it would not be the right terms for some other companies. And there's a variety of reasons why these valuations could be quite high, or people are willing to pay large amounts, particularly if you wanted to pivot your company into a new space, or if it's a very highly competitive deal. There can always be this disconnect between its true value and then what you pay for it. So there are oftentimes that this could be something that is just decided, even though you've established what your criteria are, your go-no-go based on financials, this can often be something that prevents us from moving forward if we don't think we can come to some kind of favorable deal terms. And finally, I think more importantly is really, are there clear go-no-go decisions? where do you draw the line is like, well, this program is not succeeding and we should, not take the option, not take the license. How do we plan for success? Would they a clear go to the next stage? And have we thought about what that post-go look like? And once again, do we have the capabilities to do that? So all of this is really kind of decided upfront in the due diligence, and these are literally questions that we present to our management, our justification for why we think we should do a deal. So having you as a partner also understand this and help us build this story is also essential to potential success for our collaboration.
Can I ask a question? It seems to me all the considerations are very personal or subjective. So
It's a lot of
are you talking about the
storytelling.
consideration for team consideration or personal consideration?
These are team decisions, but they are presented to individuals within management, right? So there is turn to understand what their perspective is, what they consider transformational versus what I. But the idea here really is to tell a story to your potential farmer partner for why this is transformational, why you're credible, why you think this can go to the next step. So, and to be honest, I mean, these are, you will see variability from one company to the next, right? And that could be very much dependent upon their, well, their own management, their current pipeline, and where they think they're going to in the future. So there always is kind of this strategic lens in which how you're viewing all of these questions, and some of them can be kind of overridden because this is like, we decided to go into this area and we will interpret these questions slightly differently from perspective. But as I said, it's not, some things are sort of hard and fast when we're thinking about, say, small molecules and having to have a certain threshold for permeability or toxicity to move forward. These kind of broader questions for, does this look like, is this fair, does this look promising, can be a bit subjective, but part of our idea, if we do think that this is a reason to invest, is being able to articulate that, at least our approach, for why we think that this is a good justification to move forward. So, your business development and your partner should be viewed as that, as partners, right? To help you communicate your story internally. This is never an adversarial relationship, so understanding what their expectations to their own management and their own governance is will also help move the programs along. So now I'll just kind of pivot and really give you more of a flavor of how this works in Johnson & Johnson. So we are a global network that really is trying to tap into innovation across the world. So this is our former CEO or CSO, Paul Stoffels. He's now moved on to be CEO of a new company, but he was very instrumental in setting up this global external innovation, once again believing that we can only do so much internal and we really need to have a strong network of technology for the future. Johnson & Johnson, of course, is an old company, been around over 130 years. I'm sure many of you guys have our products in your home, but it is comprised of 3 business segments. That's pharma, medical devices, and consumer, although consumer will become its own separate entity within the next year. We, of course, have products all across the world, but as I said, highlighted, we do spend over $12 billion just in internal R&D. So this is, once again, an organization that has devoted a lot of internal resources to development, but still realizes that we can't do everything and have to go quite broadly out to look for innovation. We have a global presence, and so highlighted here are just really those institutions that are focused on innovation, and of course not just our headquarters and our manufacturing sites, because those are be even more would populate this entire map. But we're divided up kind of into these innovation centers, our JLabs organizations, and our locations are very concentrated in these regions where we think that we want to access innovation. So obviously representation in the Asia Pacific, we have representation in London and also just in general in Belgium for our JLab sites. And then within the US, we have a nice concentration of JLabs and innovation centers along the East Coast and in Toronto. And then our West North America side also includes, New Zealand and Australia, but we're in San Francisco, the Bay Area, and obviously here in Texas, really to try to capitalize on what's being done at the Texas Medical Center and all the other institutions throughout Texas. So that kind of gives you this idea is like, we'll have a global focus, but do we really have the tools to support innovation from end to end? So from early stage initiation to truly the commercialization of this. So they want to take a true 360 view of this by having not only places that we can incubate the ideas, but really giving the right expertise to promote these collaborations, to accelerate the development through investments, and through variety of deals that can be done. So this all kind of comprises what we call Johnson & Johnson Innovation and its multiple pillars. The first of which is this innovation team. So there are 4 life science innovation centers in these hotspots, that being in London, Cambridge, US, San Francisco, and in Asia. And they really house a lot of our subject matter experts in our various therapeutic areas, who really are expected to understand their local ecosystems and begin to mine that for opportunities for collaboration, deals, and investments. In the past 8 years, they've done over 600 plus collaborations. This is really where the bulk of these collaborations come from, or these innovation centers. And they are able to deploy, over $1 billion since 2013. So meaning funding for a lot of that early stage research that we have. Once again, they have the deep scientific and commercial expertise across our therapeutic areas, medical device, and also consumer. We have our JLabs locations, and there are 13 of those that are located across the globe. And really this can provide you with like a physical infrastructure that has the state-of-the-art lab amenities, offices, and equipment. We also have virtual membership to JLabs, and I can certainly talk to you guys a bit more about all of the offerings that JLabs can have to really support entrepreneurs, from education to our programming, not only this kind of common equipment, but the idea is that we are there from the initiation to really help your companies grow. But JLabs is not just a component of the infrastructure or allow a place to incubate. We really do, once again, view ourselves as kind of this one-stop shop for your on-roads into Johnson & Johnson Innovation. So every company that comes into JLabs gets vetted for an opportunity for research collaboration and equity investment and other support from our R&D organizations. With that, we have about over really close to 800 portfolio companies within our JLabs, and about 200 of which already have at least one collaboration with Johnson & Johnson. Once again, either a collaboration could be an equity investment, or a research collaboration, or a service agreement, or a licensing deal with Johnson & Johnson. In the next year, now that we have all of our JLabs are up and running, they just had opened up a new one in DC, there's really been a push to make sure all of the companies that are coming into JLabs really are on strategy with Johnson & Johnson. So although our acceptance into JLabs is really no strings attached, there is really a push to kind of maximize utility to the entrepreneur and to Johnson & Johnson to see if there is a potential for a deal, be that collaboration, equity investment, etc. So we're trying to make sure that every company, either near term or midterm, within 3 to 5 years, has the opportunity to do a deal with Johnson & Johnson. We also checked other metrics on how to increase female and minority-led companies, and we have some very concerted efforts on which we're trying to promote diversity in our recruitment of companies and getting a board membership to have better representation, and then also to see how our companies can impact aspects of health equity from an early stage innovative perspective. Finally, we, as the third pillar, is really our venture investment arm. And this, they have over 47 years, they've done a lot of investments, just 45 in 2020. What's also new is that they now are also looking at co-creation of new companies. So our venture arm, once again, is a strategic investing arm, so they don't just invest in everything, it has to be aligned with the strategy of our various sector areas. But with that, they still want to remain at these kind of transformational stages, so they're open to really help create a new company. So this can come into some of the stipulations, if you said, if you take on venture money and help you create a company, that there are certain requirements that they're going to be expected for, like when you build your C-suite, who gets to be on it, where the location of the company will all come into that. But with that, it does give us an opportunity to really kind of shape our ecosystems. If we see something that's early, we can help you actually build out that credible team that could help you get additional funding and collaborations for your next stage of development. And with that, they've already deployed over like $500 million just in 2020 for these investments. And then we have a traditional business development team that's also located within the innovation centers, the four that we talked about, and they do the very traditional licensing M&A expertise that you would expect. But these are also colleagues that will be in partnership with the leaders, the scientific experts at the innovation centers that will help craft things like the term sheet and the post-deal alliance management to make sure that there's going to be a successful collaboration. And finally, as I said, we've kind of focused on just kind of how Johnson & Johnson Innovation can work, and really, once again, the resources that are employed at every stage of an entrepreneur's journey or an innovator's journey, from your need to incubate within JLabs, your potential to get funding through JDDC, to become a serial entrepreneur and create a new company with the help of JDDC, and then kind of onboard these opportunities into the R&D organization through the innovation centers, through licensing and option deals. Another aspect that we do to really source opportunities are these quick fire challenges. So these are ways in which we will send out a message where we are looking for innovators to submit ideas related to perhaps a new delivery mechanisms, or focusing on those that are focusing on health equity issues. We have a new one that's just launched about using nursing-led technologies to really bring those into the organization. So the topic is often chosen by the therapeutic area, so it's already something that is highly on strategy and has the potential to highlight a particular need within our therapeutic area. The awardees of those types of quickfire challenges will receive grant funding and access to our JLabs, and of course mentorship from our expertise. So I encourage you guys, and there'll be some links at the end, to look and see if any of these quickfire challenges are appropriate for you. With that, you will just be onboarded into Johnson & Johnson Innovation, and you'll have access to our JLabs and the potential to receive additional funding for your programs. And this has been enacted in the last 2 years as part of our collaboration with BARDA. It's this Blue Night. It was initially driven by a need to kind of respond to the next level of the next pandemic, but they are looking beyond simply the COVID vaccines, but thinking about how do we respond kind of globally to any kind of potential health threat. And so we already have 2 companies within our JLabs portfolio that are part of Blue Night. That's Seven Hills, which is also doing an immunotherapy play that can be combined with the vaccines. We have another company called Gerada that's developing this thin film technology that could alleviate kind of the need for cold chain storage. So all the hiccups that we've had with supply chain, if we could sort of start shipping things like vaccines and antibodies at room temperature, that opens up a lot of possibilities for us. So these are something that the other aspect of it is it also comes with funding. So BARDA itself kind of contributes to your grant funding, and you would also have the availability to have space within JLabs. But it still needs to be aligned quite broadly with the overall strategy of both BARDA and Johnson & Johnson. Finally, as I said, we have a lot of ways in which we try to partner with you. We think choosing the right partner is also kind of key to your success. And as you enter into these discussions with different pharmas, you're in many ways like you're pitching to them, but they should also be pitching to you. Like, what do they bring to the table to bring your program to fruition? And for Johnson & Johnson, I think that we certainly have flexible deal structures, opportunities for funding, investment, new company creation. We have incubator space for you, a large R&D organization that can really support collaboration, accelerate, and then of course the commercial expertise. While we're primarily focused on pharmaceuticals, we do have an area that kind of integrates beyond pharmaceuticals, and will cover things, technologies that could be used for consumer medical devices and pharmaceuticals, and those are called our integrated healthcare solutions. So we have a very broad focus on how we can support external innovation. Now I'm just gonna go kind of specifically to what we're looking for in oncology. And to give you an idea of what are the priorities, and once again, these are very Johnson & Johnson specific, but you'll see this from different companies will obviously have their purview on what they think are their gaps based upon the current needs of their portfolio. So we know that why do we need external innovation in oncology? It's a difficult to treat disease, there's complexity at the molecular level, cancer paradigms are becoming more and more complex to really promote overall increases in overall survival. At Johnson & Johnson, you know, really the goal is to eliminate cancer, right? And so they really want to deliver, once again, that word transformative therapeutics and diagnostic solutions to patients, thinking, once again, cancer is really much a precision medicine driven disease. So the goal is to find, at least launch a new transformational drug every year, with the focus areas of looking at oncogenic drivers, certainly from a small molecule perspective, or perhaps some of these new modalities that we highlighted, from cell-based therapies, some autologous therapies, but really more of a push for looking at allogeneic NK and CAR-Ts. This is primarily driven by a collaboration with Fate. They're looking at T-cell redirectors, so multiple CD3s, looking at novel tumor antigens. We do have some early stage research for tumor vaccines. And then, once again, sort of highlighting how we can utilize our medical device group. We are looking at models we can do local drug delivery, and this is one particularly for bladder cancer. In terms of the tumor types, they're really looking at heme malignancies, multiple myeloma, certainly a key focus, prostate cancer, solid tumors, when I think there's a good understanding of what the oncogenic drivers are, and then quite broadly for immuno-oncology. And yeah, so we sort of highlight those particular areas in heme, B-cell malignancies, other myeloid malignancies, prostate cancer, focus on antigen annihilation, early intervention detection, targeted T-cell therapies related to CDCs, and perhaps looking at some of these other components of the T-cell immunity, things that can increase its potency, that's quite broad. And for solid tumors, really, the idea is gonna have to be driver-focused, targeted therapies, with the ideas that we're still focusing on lung, gastric intestinal, and bladder. As I had highlighted, that we do have some areas of focus that really kind of transcend some therapeutic areas and go beyond from pharma, medical device. And we call that kind of a world without disease initiative. And so the idea is like, if we can find things very early, we can intercept and we can truly cure them. And so part of that is really our lung cancer initiative, where they really want to do some early detection of lung lesions. And to do that, they need to have next generation image guided robotics to really look at the bronchoscopes. We'll want to have a good understanding of the architecture, because you only want to be able to target tumor versus normal tissue. So with that, like, how do you locate, how do you biopsy, how do you treat, how do you deliver in that case? And with that, the lung cancer initiative is really focused on a lot of this imaging technology, a lot of the platforms to do this from a robotic standpoint, and ways to really do very precise guidance and delivery of drugs within that space. They're also trying to do very similar interceptions for colorectal cancer, but how do we treat it as an inflammation for colon cancer? Really, once again, along the lines of looking at precision medicine, but having a more synthetic lethal approach, looking at APC loss and EP3 mutant tumors. And also there had been a broad interest in the tumor microbiome, and if that could be used as some of these therapeutics potential. So the World Without Disease Accelerator is really to look at these kind of earlier, riskier approaches that they really think are gonna be more curative and preventative, as opposed to what our standard therapeutic area for oncology would be very focused on simply a therapeutic. things that are kind of out of scope are also important to understand, things that are treating metastatic CRC, because once again, we want to be able to look very early on in the stage, and the same thing for the lung cancer initiative. They're looking at things that are really focused on early stage interventions in these various fields. So we spent a lot of time talking about oncology, but just so you guys understand, this is Johnson & Johnson as a...
Can I interrupt you? If you go to the previous slide, it is a site where we can apply, or how we can get in touch with the people interested in this stuff in the home?
So through me, right? So the idea is like you let me know what you're interested in. I see if there's an interest within the, once again, the subject matter experts within these areas and your technology, and if they think that they're warranted further conversation, we get in touch with you. I'll show you overall how to kind of keep abreast of all the activities that go on to Johnson & Johnson, because oftentimes we'll have programming around these particular areas that can go into a bit more detail on what the strategic focus is going to be. There are also things like those quick fire challenges where you can also apply to, and sometimes they're related to these types of initiatives. But then there's also just me to email or walk over it and come talk to us. And that holds true for all of the pharmaceutical areas. So we have this concept of really being a one Johnson & Johnson innovation. So if you talk to any person within our innovation spectrum, they should be able to connect you quite broadly to all of these parts of the organization as needed. So while I lead this incubator space, I'm also responsible for just sending opportunities for licensing to our immunology colleagues in California, if I think that is aligned with their strategy. So certainly feel free to contact me or anyone else that you kind of interact with through Johnson & Johnson regarding, you know, kind of next stage of discussions and maybe even just further clarity on what some of these focus areas could be. Medical devices, looking at 3D printing, tissue ablation, tissue regeneration, lots of things that still relate to our vision group. And the list can kind of go on and on. Johnson, when I came on board, it's such a large organization and a lot of different touch points, but they do try to make a very concerted effort into aligning on the strategy. The only caveat I could just say with the medical devices, they're looking for probably more programs that are near commercialization for them. So that's been a challenge to get great engagement for some of the early opportunities that would be appropriate for JLabs. But once again, they are thinking about, once again, what are their gaps in their technology, and a lot of that is related to this digital surgery robotic space. So that's where they really want to invest in early stage innovation, while perhaps things in osteoporosis and the cardiovascular have to be more near-term commercialization. Finally, we have our consumer group. A lot of this could potentially change as they roll out to their own entity, but I can say we have an active company in JLabs now that is doing collaborations with consumer to have added products kind of combined with our current Aveeno line to see if we can improve some aspects of the microbiome in skin and improve general hydration and reduce some of the other eczema autoimmune disorders that are associated. And finally, we talk about this integrated healthcare system, mostly focusing on the lung cancer initiative for lung and also for colorectal cancer, but there are a variety of other focus areas, particularly type 1 diabetes, other autoimmune disorders, a healthy baby initiative that's also kind of focused on the gut microbiome, and then a lot of enabling kind of understanding of how do we do more direct-to-consumer health technologies. And finally, as I said, here is our simple slide for how to stay in touch with Johnson & Johnson. There's a general email, Johnson & Johnson Innovation, that you can look at. If you follow on Twitter or through the J&J Innovation site, it really gives you a list of all of the quickfire challenges, the BARDA collaborations, a lot of upcoming programming from a scientific perspective or partnering perspective that you can become involved with. Subscribe to newsletter, it'd be very general. And the same thing, the quickfire challenges. And then I'm sure Sarah also has my email that you can feel free to contact me. And I believe that's probably just the last slide of the presentation. So happy to address any additional questions that you would have.
So sorry, I know that I talk too much in Romanian, but I'm very.
Can you introduce yourself?
I'm George Cali. I'm George Cali from MD Anderson. I'm very interested how we can connect with it, for example. And I tell you why. And I tell to all the colleagues of the NIH. NIH has a foundation of NIH, FNIH, which is very much interested in biomarkers development. And they have yearly calls for ideas in order to do early cancer development. And then they contact exactly companies like yours, Johnson & Johnson, who are coming with the funds for the scientists who are involved in this consortium. So this is why I wanted to talk to you. So it's basically a concept that is already running, in which NIH, through the foundation, plus large companies like yours, are funding several years of early development of such new platforms, new way to develop biomarkers, new things, including the early stage of lung cancer. It's one of the most of their major interests. So how can we be in touch with?
So is the request here for Johnson & Johnson to participate in the fund?
Yeah, they are doing these things, yeah.
Okay. Well, we can start with me. We'll have to see if that is something that would probably need to be led by the R&D organization. So while I highlighted the innovation centers, they are more focused on kind of near-term deals. This foundational support would be a multi-year, right, where you would get, presumably the companies involved would get a purview of the research that's coming out and probably some guidance into what they would want to see. So that would really need to be somebody kind of embedded within the R&D organization. So I'd be surprised if like someone from Johnson & Johnson hasn't been contacted already for this, as you say, given that the touch points, but I think we can certainly make sure from my perspective that it has been reviewed and see if it's a good opportunity or not. So please, yeah, send that along with me, and I will try to escalate it up the chain just to make sure that the appropriate people have seen it.
My name is Trinity from MD Anderson. So can you elaborate a little bit more on drug delivery system? You're interested in, are you limited to just lung cancer, bladder cancer, or you're open to?
Yeah, so for the, particularly for the lung cancer, so drug delivery is really, as you said, is something that kind of bridges medical device and the therapeutic area. So if I just bring something for drug delivery straight to oncology, it's gonna be like, probably no. Straight to medical device, no. But for the lung cancer initiative, then that's why we have to have that lung cancer focus for it to be delivery, because that's where they're trying to do the biggest interception. What we have now is a system called Monarch, which allows surgeon to really kind of go in, mark the tumor, remove it for biopsy. What they're exploring is, can they use that same kind of bronchoscope to deliver drugs directly into the tumor? So there's one aspect of the visualization is how do you highlight where the tumor is? How do you maybe can do real time? So with this, haven't seen the device employed, but you still have to kind of guide it into the lung, and then if you kind of miss the mark, you have to readjust it to figure out where to pinpoint the site. So they're also looking for a technology that you can do kind of real time guidance without stopping and starting. So being able to combine all of that, being able to zero in, detect it, deliver a drug directly for lung cancer would be key. And then to say we do have the other system that's working, the TAR system that's working for bladder, that would be very similar approach. So once again, as we talk about how do you storytell for these partnerships, what's transformational, how it needs to be on strategy. So I would think focusing on those areas first would be the best way for us to kind of sell an opportunity. And then of course, if it has broader utility, that's great, but I would zero in on lung and bladder.
Thank you.
So I'm just wondering, so I mean, based on your talk, it seems this is pretty general. It's a worldwide effort, as Dr. Kelly mentioned. This sort of some of them part of the public and the private sector relationship study effort. So I'm just wondering, do you have any specifics for this market, like this area, or for example, for the quick buyer, I know several companies like Eli Lilly, ABB, or GSK, they all have these kind of online crowdsource challenges. I mean, everybody in the world can submit their ideas and for the competition. Do you have anything like, as Dr. mentioned, so how can we connect for this type of market in this area, like JLab, specifically focus on particular field?
Okay, so see if I understand the question. So first, I mean, Johnson & Johnson is global, right? So any initiative we're going to do is intended to be employed globally. But what we have done is make very specific investments in communities, like that's why we have a JLabs here in Texas. And so I'm not quite sure the question is, because all the funding from Johnson & Johnson would still be very global. We are considering within the upcoming year, because we think that there's a lot of expertise within Texas around digital surgery and robotics, to launch a quick fire challenge kind of specific to our region, to draw in tech from the Austin area, from San Antonio, et cetera, to either be housed in JLabs or be part of our virtual community. So that's something, but I don't see why there is no global restrictions to how we can do the quick fire. So they don't necessarily make them regional specific in that case, because they're trying to draw them in. But since we do already have regional focuses through our ICs and our JLabs, that's how we kind of amplify that. So that's what we also did with that BARDA collaboration that we highlighted. It did roll out first kind of in New York and DC area, just to see what the markets are gonna be. And then we broadened that out. We, as I said, already have 2 companies that are coming from Texas academics that are now part of that collaboration that are being incubated in JLabs. So I would think if we could if there was something very specific to the region, obviously we work a lot with CPRIT and we have a lot of CPRIT funding companies within JLabs, so that economic initiative has been quite fruitful for us to have opportunities to incubate, and some of those companies are actively being reviewed for Johnson & Johnson deals per se. But until we can see if there's a particular concentration of expertise or knowledge within the Texas area, then we could think about launching a directed quickfire challenge. And they said we're planning on doing that for digital surgery and robotics in the upcoming year. So I don't know if the geography question is quite interesting. It said, while we are, all the JLabs, although distinct, are still interconnected. So we view it as one large portfolio of companies for us, whether or not it's in New York or in California. It all gets reviewed by Johnson & Johnson in one. So we pull all the oncology companies that we have, be it from Texas, be it from the Boston area, anytime we're doing landscape analysis for that. So there's never work in isolation of the broader Johnson & Johnson community. So once again, there's reasons to be brought on physically, but also joining our network virtually gives you opportunities to be viewed by management, investors, both internal, external to J&J, and then a lot of the other support that we do, like training for board membership is also something that can be a component of the educational tools that we do for our CEOs.
So how many companies are incubated here right now?
So right now we have 45.
And they are mostly device?
So the breakdown is about 6% pharma. Most of that is oncology. I think once again, coming from TMC and D. Anderson and the CPRIT funding. And then the remaining 40 or so % are medical devices. And that's fueled because we have a Center for Device Innovation that's part of the medical device group within Johnson & Johnson, is also here partnered with the TMC. And so that is kind of, I wouldn't say a JLabs counterpart, but it is also intended to be a stage for early stage incubation, but just for specific for the medical device group. So those companies that are kind of started there can often migrate over to JLabs to continue their prototype development.
So I know Johnson & Johnson used to consider medical device with diagnostics together.
No.
But when you call medical device today, you never mentioned diagnostic.
Correct.
So do they still do it?
In terms of some of these biopsies they were doing for lung cancer, diagnosis is a very tricky, area because it's needed, but we don't necessarily have a commercial focus for diagnostics. So, as I said, my background, I worked at Roche, which really did have a standalone diagnostic organization where we not only made equipment for diagnostics, but made kits, and so there's an expectation that we could develop a companion diagnostics with any of our therapies. They even went on and made investments in Foundation Medicines for the FMI database to really help facilitate that. Johnson & Johnson, on the other hand, does not, as you said, divested from diagnostics several years ago, or more than that, but they still understand the need for a diagnostic, certainly for oncology. So there's an interest in developing diagnostic solutions, but they will not be necessarily to commercialize that. So if there's a need for it, then that has to be on kind of the partner organization to develop that, and can't be, once again, thinking about is this the right partner, do they have the expertise? Johnson & Johnson would not have the commercial expertise to develop a diagnostic, but they do understand the need for its requirements for these solutions.
On top of your head, here, is there any diagnostic being incubated?
We do have some focus on some diagnostics, but it is hard to get traction in terms of the deals going forward for just a straight diagnostic play. So I would, unless it's really related to this robotics, digital surgery aspect, I would, resist just going for a straight biomarker analysis like in a kit format. It'd just be hard to get it on strategy.
Like the
for-
IVD?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah, I have a question for you, or I was hoping maybe you'd have some perspective on, I think J&J's somewhat unusual in how specific they are with what they're looking for, and how public they are in that as well. In your experiences with the other pharma companies that you worked at, regardless of whether or not it's publicly stated, do you find that they're equally specific, or do you find that they're more open to surprising opportunities, or how?
Yeah, well,
what's your perspective on
a couple
that?
of things that I joined Johnson & Johnson, I was really surprised at the level of investment they have in the external innovation, right? So they're one of the few companies that have really built an incubation space, like taking a physical investment in the infrastructure that's needed. So maybe that's also why their approach is, it's very important for us to be able to communicate what we want and what we don't want. And so that really helps move these conversations along. My other companies, when we did presentations, maybe it was a bit broader, but when you sat down and had those meetings with business development and the scientists, they also wanted to be very specific about, here's what we're looking for, here's what's in scope, what's out of scope. A lot of that comes from us in external innovation, kind of pushing our R&D organization to clarify what's on a want list. There can be a hesitance to put things on the want list because they feel that may be mirroring their view, and their impetus is to be, I'm open to everything, just I'll see the data and let that guide me. But in principle, there are things that kind of need to be aligned with strategy, could be add-ons, maybe gaps. So while there is always opportunities to be opportunistic about it, but they still need to be focused. And what I didn't add in this presentation, you can imagine the number of opportunities that come into an organization like Johnson & Johnson, since we're covering all of pharma, it's like thousands of things. Like just for JLabs, you screen through several hundred a year just to wheedle down to a few. When I was at Roche, just in oncology, we did thousands of just reviews. J&J did 60 deals last year just in oncology. So you can imagine if that represents really like 1% of the applications that are coming through. So a lot gets reviewed. So you do have to have some kind of firm guidelines of what's in scope and what's out of scope, what stage that you're looking for when you're really going to be risking. So we do have to be a bit firm. But think since they are such an have so many touch points for externally facing, it has been great that the R&D organization has really been very definitive about, here's our strategy for what we're looking for and what we are looking for.
And as you start thinking towards that new company creation, are you guys, a lot of times on those very, very early projects, there's multiple applications. Do you then guide them towards those strategic interests or?
Yeah, so that would be sort of even prior to establishing the new company, right? That's kind of defined. Understanding that there's always reasons to pivot, but they do want to give that guidance on where we think this platform could play or where we think the market would be, and then set up a team to enable that. So that would be, once again, the stipulations of creating this new company with J&J being one of the first investors.
Any questions? What stage, one last question, just so people can kind of have frameworks in their minds. What stages, deals are happening sort of all stages of development right now, but what are sort of in your mind the benchmarks of development where you might start thinking about a partnership? New company creation being one, but then like as you're maturing a technology, I assume there's peaks and valleys as to optimal time. So in your mind, how would you sort of think about that?
In its very therapeutic area will kind of stipulate where they're willing to engage with certain companies. For example, oncology and immunology are open to more early stage deals. And this is really dependent upon or catalyzed by they have some new strategic focuses coming in from like new management coming on board. So that's always seems kind of on the back end when you see this flurry of deals, it's often kind of the result of some leadership changes where they want to move into a different direction. But even in those cases, they are wanting to see if there's some general kind of proof of concept data that has been generated for your molecule. So you're more likely to get some engagement once you have some in vivo studies that are ongoing and some prototype molecule which you can do that work in. So that would be a good point to start some engagement. You can have those conversations quite earlier, but in terms of them making kind of decisions, they may want to wait in. If it's something that is really a hot topic and they see that there is a reason to investigate early, they can also help contribute to development of that type of data package in kind of a shared research agreement where J&J or whoever partner does some aspects of the research and some is done on your side, particularly once again aligning with their expertises. Like if you need to do a broad sort of high throughput screening campaign, that's maybe not something that you can do, but Johnson & Johnson has a broad library and they could kind of contribute to that work. So having those conversations early, I think benefit in terms of guidance and really seeing what's going to resonate with the individual company. So I was highlighting for medical devices, that's going to be very different. They're going to want to wait until, I've gotten feedback that they want to see clinical data before they would do like a new device for orthopedics. And so that's very late along the path for many companies who start getting that level of engagement. So a bit earlier for the pharma therapeutic side, different for medical device, but kind of the same thing for neuroscience is going to be quite different too, just because of the indication. They're going to want to be looking for more compounds that have more clinical proof of concept too.
So you would focus on having the right data package for that proof of concept versus, I think sometimes it's easy to get concerned about, well, we don't have all the GLP figured out, or we don't have the manufacturing figured out. From J&J's perspective, you're not as worried about that because you can do it, right?
Yeah, unless there are challenges. So part of the due diligence would be to review their developability red flags, right? And if not, and if so, how do we build that into perhaps a feasibility study or some early stage risk? So that would become part of the terms. Contingent upon completion of X, then we would move on. So either not having it figured out is okay, but if there are already some known red flags, that needs to be will become a component of those key go no go decisions that we have for the next steps.
Can you speak to the nature of partnerships with a founder's university research program or lab? Because oftentimes in areas like cell therapy, the university program may be a piece of the puzzle in the technology validation or development program. And even if you've done alliances directly with university labs, i.e. not a startup company, I'd just like to get a feel for sort of the philosophy and approach and toolbox that J&J uses in those situations.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think that kind of what has been challenging or with the IP. for when something is kind of coming out of university, they still remain heavily involved, in that case, and so bringing those up very early in the conversations can help at least legal kind of craft what the agreement needs to be. Is it a two-party just between you and the company, or does it need to also loop in the university for the expectation that's gonna come out of the agreement? So it's not a deterrent, but it does add another level of complexity and, potentially on the downstream, if we're talking about milestone payments and royalties, are they not only contributing to your company, but now also getting a cut from the academic? So, in many cases, that's happened quite a lot in J Labs, where there's some secured license, but there's still some ownership by the institutions, and trying to squeeze that out as soon as possible. I know there can be some challenges in certain institutions don't always have the clarity on what those pathways could be looked at, but highlighting that very early on in discussion that this is a potential complication. It doesn't deter, but it just needs to be clarified, and then will be reflected in the appropriate terms of the agreement.
So follow Sarah's question. So usually at what stage you are interested in the therapeutics development? Like it's the very early stage, or at the stage of you got the data optimization, but you don't really have a lot of vivo data, or at the stage of that you have to have done some IND enabling stuff?
Yeah. Once again, I would say the always answer that it depends on what you're working on. Guiding principles, the more data, the better, right? Because it's been de-risked. And that can also be maybe an advantage to the startup, because if you've taken on all the risk at this point, right, you can expect a higher valuation. And what I previously had, what are the probabilities of success for each stage of development? If something is very early on, it's much more likely to fail, and so your valuation is going to be a bit lower. But if you have gotten it to the point where it's a true IND development candidate, then your likelihood of going into phase 1 is quite high, and so you can expect to have a higher valuation for that program. So if you can, I would move it forward as far as you want, but there are, obvious caveats to that, like doing IND-enabling studies costs money, right, to do that, and so you need a research collaboration or some additional funding to move on to that next stage. You can think about it, if it's something that's truly transformational, there may be an interest to get in early and guide you along those paths and utilize internal resources to do the development components of it while you focus on the innovative discovery component. If it is something like another Me-Too therapy or something that could have some marginal differentiation, they're gonna want to see what is that differentiated point, right? And so they may not want to, if it's like, I'm going to go against the current targeted therapy that's already approved, and you only have some preclinical data, they may be an expectation, well, let's wait to see if that holds true in the clinical trials. For example, like another PD-1, PD-L1 inhibitor, right? That's going to be, while conceptually it would make sense to inhibit both pathways, you still need to show that differentiated feature, and that can only be done within the clinic. So there'd be a little bit hesitance, even though immunotherapy is clearly on the list, to go into something that is, while innovative in the approach, would only have a differentiated readout in the clinic. So, as I said, it's a good point to think about, and that's kind of the feedback that we would give, right? Come back to me when you've done the in vivo work. Come back to me. We will monitor your clinical development, and then we can re-engage at that point. But that's kind of the idea for oncology, but once again, other areas like immunology, we're willing to look at some impacts on autoimmune, because we think that we also we want to be able to guide what the indication is going to be, and there could be multiple indications that could be useful for a particular platform, so they're willing to utilize some internal resources plus the external to get it to this de-risk point where we would look for to do an option.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Fiona.
Okay. Thanks for the invitation. Thank you guys for